I'm a skeptic of the supernatural, but I believe anything is possible. I won't discount supernatural occurrences if I can't find a logical explanation for them. I've experienced a few incidents I couldn't explain, but I'm going to tell you about the one that freaked me out the most, though. So here goes. I live in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, USA. A lot of people in the cities have cabins in either northern Minnesota or rural Wisconsin. Our cabin was in rural Wisconsin, in a small town called Danbury. The cabin's on Long Lake, at the very end of Long Lake Road. Along with the cabin came almost an acre of land, covered by thick forest. We carved a trail through the land for ATVs and whatnot. So the scene is set. Now, about me. I'm an outdoor enthusiast and have been forever. I'm 6'4", fit, and I've been a hunter since I was like 12. I know my environment, the wildlife, and the forest well, and I'm typically comfortable in the woods. I come from a military family, and I'm trained in multiple forms of combat, armed and unarmed. I also have extensive firearms training, and as a result, I'm fairly confident in my ability to defend myself. I'm not really scared of people. Big predators, on the other hand, like bears, wolves, and so on, I'm not a big fan of. This brings me to the weirdness. I'm 23 now, but at the time of this incident I was 16. Even at 16 I was a decent hunter, and I had good common sense. Anyway, I was at the cabin with my cousin and grandparents. It was the middle of summer, I think July, with hot temps and whatnot. My cousin and I were shooting at each other with airsoft guns. We had a full-on battle going on throughout the property, including the woods, which were my stalking grounds. I was wearing my BDUs with face cover and all, as well as head-to-toe camo. Our battle ended up about 100 yards northwest of the cabin, in the woods. We ended the war on the main trail and were standing around talking about the events that had transpired. I was still on guard, because I always am. I suppose I could be considered a tad paranoid. Alright, so we were standing there talking when I noticed something move at our 12 o'clock, about 50 meters out. I got quiet and focused dead ahead, scanning. My cousin was still talking, so I whispered, "Shh." So he shut up. I figured the movement I had just seen was a bird or something. As a joke, and to freak him out, I told him we were being watched. That's when I noticed that the woods were dead quiet. No birds were chirping. There was no sound. That's when I started to think, this only happens when a big predator's around. So I started looking even closer. That's when I saw it. At my 12 o'clock, there was this large animal. It had reddish brown fur and almost blended in perfectly until I focused on it. It had long front limbs with what appeared to be formidable claws, and it was standing kind of slouched down against a tree, like it was trying to be stealthy. Even though it was standing like that, it was nearly as tall as me. The only reason I saw it was because of its teeth. I think it was panting because its whitish teeth were visible. Its snout appeared to be a tad elongated. I couldn't get a better look because my first thought was, we have to go. I even said it out loud. My cousin was already freaked, so when I said those words, he bolted up the trail towards the cabin. He nearly left me in the dust, because instead of running when he did, I waited a good 3 seconds. I was being protective of him, keeping my eye on it until I saw it move. It was fast. That's when I ran like hell. I didn't see which way that thing ran. All I know is that I heard it crashing through the woods. My cousin stopped at the shed, which was still 50 meters from the cabin, away from me. When I caught up, I yelled, "Go! Go!" and we both bolted to the cabin. We got inside and shut the door. My grandma asked why we looked so panicked and had slammed the door shut, but I knew they wouldn't believe me, so I said we'd seen a bear. My cousin nodded. Later that night, after my grandparents had gone to sleep, we talked about it. I asked my cousin if he'd seen it. He told me that he had paused for a second to look back after he ran, to see if I was running with him. He said that he had seen me, still looking at it. He said that's when he saw it move, and me run. He said he had mostly just seen a flash of fur. He went on to say he thought it wasn't the right color to be a bear. I also agreed that it wasn't the right color to be one, and told him that we only had black bears in the area, and that it wasn't built like a bear either. I told him I never thought it was a bear. He asked me why I had lied about it to my grandparents, and I told him that they wouldn't have believed us. We've kept it between the two of us, until now. The animal didn't match any known regional animal profiles in the area, and I'm at a loss for what it may have been. I do know it was stalking us though, and that it was built like an athletic predator, not a bear. It wasn't as heavy-set as a bear would have been. After the incident, neither of us would go into the woods on foot, alone, without a gun. We generally only went back in the woods on ATVs from that point forward. I always loved that cabin, up until then. But fortunately, now it's been sold. This is a difficult thing for me to write down on paper. I had no idea what a cryptid was until my son told me about his encounter. All these years, I've thought that what I had seen was just a very deformed bear. Just so you know, I was driving that night, and I never drink and drive. I was 100% sober. I haven't talked about my encounter since it happened, until I told my son. Since then, I've told my best friend. Most evenings, just about an hour before dark, some of us enjoyed going for deer rides. We had a route we'd always use. It started out on Rustic Road, which was southwest of our cabin on Long Lake, just south of Danbury, Wisconsin. The route took us to a place that went through a wildlife preserve, and then we ended up on the road that goes from Hinckley to Danbury, Wisconsin. The road through the preserve always made me uncomfortable, because it was a swampy bog on both sides of it. It was a narrow gravel road, and in order to turn around you'd need to go down a very narrow drive to a parking area for hunters. I had only been in one of those parking areas once, and it creeped me out. We never saw deer on that road, so we typically went fast in that area. We would have avoided that gravel road altogether, but we always saw deer just before the preserve, and just after. On this evening, it was just my sister-in-law and I that went on the deer ride. This happened about 15 or 16 years ago, so we didn't have cell phones. Sometimes we'd take cameras to take pictures of the deer, but this night we didn't have a camera with us. It was a hot night, and we had our windows down because the AC wasn't working. I was driving a large car, a '98 Cadillac. We'd just started down that creepy road when we noticed something black on the road, about half a mile ahead of us. We were driving pretty fast. As we got closer, it appeared to be dark gray in color. It also appeared to have an elongated muzzle. It had its back to us, but it was a little sideways, so we could tell it was eating something in the road. I stopped the car and just kept my foot on the brake. This animal had very wide, muscular shoulders, and its fur was longer than a bear's. Its ears were pointy, like a German shepherd's, and stood straight up on top of its head. It had hands. It was holding a dead rabbit, I think. I was talking to Amy. I said, "What is that?" I think I was verbalizing every thought that came into my head. I was totally freaked out. Then the animal noticed us. It started to turn its head. That's when I turned on my headlights. It wasn't dark yet, but I wanted to see this thing better. It turned and faced my car. The headlights caught its eyes. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Its eyes glowed reddish orange in the headlights, and I freaked. To me, this creature looked demonic in nature. Then it stood up straight, on its back legs. As this thing moved, it was jerky, like it wasn't comfortable in its own skin. It was not a natural movement. The animal sprinted at my car. It took at least 6 steps. I gunned my car right towards it. I was in a panic, terrified. It turned right, still standing upright, and then dropped to all fours. Its legs had an odd bend in them, like backward knees. I just screamed, "What is that?" And it ran into the swamp. I got the hell out of there. We stopped on the road to our cabin, and by then it was dark. When we stopped, Amy and I both cried. We couldn't stop shaking. We talked about what we had just seen, and we both agreed that we'd tell people we'd seen a bear. To be honest, at that time, I honestly thought it was a deformed bear. But today, I know it was not. I'm no longer in denial. What I saw, I cannot understand or explain. It was just plain evil in nature. So wrong. Very wrong. I was driving home alone after doing some shopping in a nearby town and was listening to the radio. It was just before sunset on a beautiful summer day. I was admiring the sky because it was such a bright orange. While driving through some S-curves in the road, I made the first turn and saw some deer dart across the road. Immediately, I hit the brakes to slow down, not knowing if there were more to come out of the woods. On the opposite side of the road, it drops down a steep embankment to a farm field. I'd slowed the car down and scanned the tree line for more deer. That's when this thing jumped out of the woods, running after the deer. He landed in the middle of the road and cleared the rest of the road in his next stride. It's so hard to comprehend what I saw, but it fit the descriptions that I've heard about the Dogman before. It was a gray figure with a short, sleek coat. I didn't see a tail on this creature. It was on all fours and was the same height as the deer. His head was very odd. It looked like a dog head with cropped, pointed ears, but had a very short muzzle. He briefly turned his head towards me when he crossed, and his eyes, I wouldn't say they glowed, but they weren't normal animal eyes. They were like dull yellow, and they definitely stood out. His body was what really confused me, because the way it moved was like a human would move when trying to run on all fours. Its gait looked lazy, like he was just kind of loping across the road. It was very muscular in the front, but had a very thin, almost sickly-looking abdominal area and hind legs. Once he was across the road, I lost sight of him over the embankment. I was so confused as to what I saw that I didn't tell anyone right away, for fear that they'd think I'm crazy. I've been searching for answers since then, but I've come up with nothing. I eventually told my husband and one close friend, but neither of them had heard of anything that matched my description. I'm still not 100% sure that I saw a Dogman, but it's the only thing I've come across that sounds reasonably close to what I saw. I should start off explaining that my partner and I are experienced Bigfoot investigators who are in a unique situation, as we have a family group living in our research area. Last October during the full moon, my partner and I were on our hilltop, having quite a bit of success with 2 juveniles and 1 adult that we noticed. We could hear them walking in a leaf litter, and every once in a while, we could also hear a clack or wood knock from different directions. After a while, it seemed like the feeling of fun for them dissipated and became a lot more cautious. Mike heard something to our north and went a ways down to investigate, while I stayed by the camp to make sure it wasn't a diversion. He came back in a rush and said he'd seen one of the young ones come out of the wood line, running for the other side of the fire break, and what was following, he said he couldn't comprehend. It was about 6 feet tall, with pointy ears and a long snout. At this point, I have to say neither of us had given any creed to the Dogman theory. We just thought it was a mistaken identification of a Bigfoot or a bear. I had purchased a .40 cal handgun and some hydro-shock ammunition for it earlier that day, so it was in my vehicle. After Mike had explained what he had seen, I retrieved my weapon and loaded it. All the while, we could hear the two young ones chattering and the big one stomping all to our backside. They were pissed or upset about something, and they had never acted that way with us. I had Mike take me down the fire break to where he saw this creature, and with spotlights, we scanned the area. We could hear something moving around, and a few short growls. Finally, Mike caught it with the spotlight going between the trees, and what I witnessed is something I would never have dreamed of seeing, except on a movie screen. A 6-foot wolf walking on its hind legs. I fired my weapon in the air, and it turned to the southeast, into the woods. We cautiously made our way back to camp, but we could hear this thing pacing us to our left. As we got back to camp, we kept listening to this thing approaching us from the woods. Mike turned on the spotlight, and I leveled my gun wherever the sound was coming from. It was approaching us without fear, and it felt to both of us like it was stalking us, just as it had one of our juvies that Mike had witnessed earlier. It came out from between the trees, and I shot it square in the ribs at about 20 yards. We had measured the next day, and I'm a very good shot. I saw the wound, and I know without a doubt I hit it. It fell to the ground, but immediately got up and ran to the southeast. We could hear it crash through the brush, and we even heard it fall down or trip over something, but it continued to head in pretty much a southerly direction, down the hill, paralleling the fire break. We were both freaked out by this time and broke camp and left. The next morning I loaded up a few extra clips, and we went back up to see if it died somewhere close or was just wounded, so we felt we had to track it down. We did track it from the point of where I shot it all the way down the canyon, and even where it made such a ruckus when it fell. The leaf litter was all upended and was fairly easy to track. At one point we did find a perfect canine track in a mud ridge, but it was over 8 inches across. The thing that absolutely baffled both of us was that there was no blood trail. None. We both saw the bullet hit, yet no blood. We tracked it all the way down the canyon until we lost the trail. We talked to a Native American couple we know, and they immediately said skinwalker. We contacted a few other investigators to try and figure out what in the hell happened. I mentioned before that neither of us took any creed from any Dogman reportings, but I do know that neither of us wants to experience it again, and I have never gone out in the woods unarmed since.
My grandfather told me this story when I was a teenager. I'm 52 now. My granddad grew up in the woods of central New Brunswick, in a very remote area where only survivalists go now. Their whole family lived out in the sticks. They lived by hunting, fishing, trapping, and doing some logging. Granddad said when he was a teenager, he and his older brother, Duke, were up in the early hours, checking trap lines on an old motorbike. It was early fall. Frost was on the grass and early morning mist still hung around the forest edges. He was rolling cigarettes with his brother, and they were out of matches, so they dipped a bit of cloth in the gas tank and ignited it off the coil wire, while Duke kicked the bike over. The sound of the bike being kicked over, without an ignition, is sort of like an animal call. That's how my granddad described it, anyways. Just as they started smoking their cigarettes, my grandfather noticed something bounding through the tree line towards them. Granddad said it ran in a way a bear did, but it stopped several yards away from them and stood up on its hind legs. It was still too far away to tell what it was, but they assumed it was a black bear because they are very common in New Brunswick. That's what began walking upright towards them. As it got nearer, Granddad said that it looked like a huge werewolf. His family origin was German, so this was not unknown. It got as close as 20 feet away from them, and then began to eye them closely. It sniffed their smokes, and then turned and ran back to the trees. Granddad said they were not scared. He said they were only shocked that such a creature was living in the woods. Granddad said it was much taller than a man, with a huge head, evil eyes, long upright ears, hands with long claws, and had hair all over its body. I can't remember what color he said its fur was, but he said it had wolf-like legs. That is his story, and he had many more.